Hey guys, just wanted to take a moment to thank you for listening to SiDEBAR Forever. If you like the show, please subscribe to us at sidebarforever.com, as well as share episodes of the podcast on your social media. That way, new listeners can find us as well. All right, consider this our opening statement. For us, Howard Chaykin is one of the all-time creative titans in comics. He's a writer, an artist, a draftsman, and a consummate storyteller, a raconteur, if you will. He pens terrific essays about comics and the business and craft of making them. And he's also just a really great talker. As a former guest of the podcast, we can definitely confirm this firsthand. One of the things that makes Chaykin an all-time great in our eyes is that he has achieved so much by being a simple journeyman of the craft. Like Liam Neeson in the film Taken, he has a particular set of skills because he puts it in the work. And yes, it is the work we want to discuss today. Swain and I sat down and litigated his 5 best comics. Now we're talking about an individual whose career goes back 50 years with Cody Starbuck, Dominic Fortune, American Flag, Times Squared, Black Kiss, The Shadow, and countless others. I'm Adrian Johnson. There was a lot of evidence to go through, and some cross-examining did take place, but Swain and I did it. And today, we present to the court Howard Chaykin's 5 best comics.
Man, I sat down, man, and was pouring over my back issues, my graphic novel, The Star's My Destination, and I read that long form interview that Chaykin did with Comics Forum Fandom, I think it is, Comics Fandom Forum. And it was actually published in 1983, so chances are he was either working on American Flag or it was just before he started working on American Flag. I guess once First Comics gave him, a bunch of money to go ahead and do something for him, which he says he still doesn't understand why they did. And many of the things that I have enjoyed about his past interviews, and as you and I both know, he's not someone who shies away from interviews. Mm-hmm. He's and he considers himself a guy who likes to talk to guys who like to talk.
There you go, like Sidney Greenstreet.
Yeah. So, but man, just really loved kind of revisiting some of those old comics. Comics that I first read when I was 15, 16, 17. Mm-hmm. Became a really tremendous fan, around that age and, 18, 19. And then, and have followed his career, from the very beginning. As you mentioned in our text exchange, that at one point you were a Chaykin completist.
Yes.
Okay. As was I.
Right.
So, I have a copy of, The Scorpion.
Oh, okay. I do have that. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And Iron Wolf, all that stuff, and even some of the the stuff after that, and then coming all the way up into the the 80s and the 90s, and then even up to mostly to modern day. Most everything else, has definitely been on my reading pile, and I've enjoyed it. But
now, are you the type? Because I know for myself, when it comes to Chaykin, it's like, man, you got to like be on the hunt for it in terms of like his contemporary books coming out. Like you almost have to know in advance. Mm-hmm. This one shot is coming out in September. It's June now, so you better get to the shop and tell them, I want this, or you better be on the lookout for it. Because Chaykin, he'll sneak in some one-shots on you. You're like, what? He did that? What?
Yeah. Not as much. I'm probably thinking Blade came out in maybe 2010, 12, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, because I remember you guys were interviewing Marko Djurdjevic about his covers. So around that time,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Maybe earlier than that then. It might have been 2009.
Mm-hmm.
2009, 2010. But that was probably the last series that I really got into. And, I think that was written by Mark Guggenheim.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which, not a bad writer. But as it relates to Chaykin's work, I think I certainly, as with anyone who would be a fan of this man, I much prefer him writing and drawing his own material.
Absolutely.
And honestly, and this is something I didn't even think about until just now, he might be the only one. Maybe Jim Starlin is number 2. But he's one of the few writer artists from that period in the 70s and 80s and 90s, mostly the 80s and the 90s, where as a writer artist, if I have to choose, I'll take him writing for another artist as opposed to him drawing for another writer.
I'd be apt to agree with that. Yeah, because case in point, there was very much a critical acclaim for Satellite Sam when that came out a few years back, with Matt Fraction writing for Chaykin. And, Fraction and Chaykin both have confirmed it as this is almost like Fraction doing Chaykin fan fiction. And I don't know why, but that rankled me so much. I was like, no, I don't want Chaykin fan fiction. I want Chaykin actually doing the whole damn thing himself. I don't want some knockoff. So to this day, I tried the first issue of Satellite Sam, and it didn't do anything for me. I was just like, this would be much better if Chaykin wrote and drew this thing himself. You know what I'm saying? So it's almost like for myself, I'm the same way. Like, I tend to go more towards stuff now that he both writes and illustrates. Like little one-shots he'll do here and there. I'll pick those up because I still like seeing new Chaykin art, but highly prefer him doing both tasks, wearing both hats for sure.
Yeah. And he's had successes collaborating with other writers. I mean, one of my favorite Chaykin stories, and this has been documented many times on the previous iteration of the show, is the Marvel Spotlight number 31 with Nick Fury, written by the aforementioned Jim Starlin.
There you go.
Yeah, one of my absolute favorites. And he's collaborated with Lin Wein on that Gideon Faust character in Star Reach, and with other writers too. But I do much prefer, even Batman Houdini. I liked him writing a story that Mark Chiarello illustrated. Twilight, I liked him doing something with the God, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez,
Yeah.
And he's had others, he's had other collaborations. I think, let's see, not City of Tomorrow. There was another one he did. Was it Bike Club?
That's right. Yeah, it was Bike Club. And in fact, he also did American Century as well.
That's it. That's what I'm trying to think of. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
now I was just going to say, it's so interesting when he writes those stories, they're of a certain type of feel because he's had collaborators on the writing side as well. He's collaborated with, I think, David Tishman. He's collaborated with John Francis Moore. And I want to say there was one more, and he broke it off with him. Maybe I'm thinking of John Francis Moore, but now he writes pretty much solo, now. But there's something to the type of material that he does where it's like you're reading it, it's like, this is really great. The artist that's on here is really good, but this would almost just be up one notch if Chaykin was drawing this himself. You know what I'm saying? Because it's almost like when he's doing both tasks, the scripting that he does has the extra bite to it. I'm thinking specifically of stuff like, The Shadow. A lot of that 80s stuff just has the extra invective to it, the extra sharp wit, that Chaykin, that tang to it. It's unmistakable. Unmistakable. It's like some good macaroni and cheese. Some it's like, this is all right, this is craft, this out the box. But when you get something homemade, they got that extra cheddar to it. That's what Chaykin is.
I would agree with you, and I think part of that is the fact that his work, more than any other, seems to represent all of his interests.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like his interest in, music from the 30s and the 40s, fashion.
Yeah.
His interest with retro things, even though I don't consider him to be necessarily like a retro guy per se, but his interest in old designs, and his interest in like the stage, like theater, and theater. I don't mean just theater. I mean theater in the sense of the slightly broadness of the delivery of theater. You get a sense of that in all of his stuff. I mean, people will call American Flag a political satire, and it is. But to some extent, all of Chaykin's work is kind of satirical in a way.
Oh yeah.
It kind of has kind of a wit, but not like a comedy wit or a comedy. There's something else to it. So I think his work kind of exudes and is suffused by all of the things that he's interested in. And that's one of the reasons why when you read it and it's like, what is this? There's some foreign element in here. Who put some goddamn raisins in the macaroni and cheese, or like what are you doing?
Yeah. But I wonder too if that's because he's of a certain age as well, so he's able to depict like these past elements, these historical elements without affectation. You know what I'm saying? Like, whereas a lot of older artists are looking to keep up with like whatever the newest, hottest trends are, so to speak, to keep their work relevant, quote unquote. He's like, no, this is what I'm interested in, and I can tell it from my perspective because partly I'm closer to a lot of those errors than, a lot of these younger contemporary artists,
When you think about it, though, he's always done this, though. He's been drawing stuff, that was set in periods since he was in his 20s and his 30s. Like, he's always done this. As a matter of fact, in that interview that I referenced earlier, he was telling the interviewer that when he goes over to Europe, they always think that he and some of his other, like Walt Simonson and I guess, other people that he would consider contemporaries at the time, people in Europe always thought, or fans in Europe always thought that he was older than he was. And the interview even made the point. He says, well, maybe it's because of the kind of stuff that you do. It's always in the 40s and the 50s and the 30s. So maybe that's why they think you're... So he's always been doing this ever since he was a young man. I think that's just where his interests lie. And then going back to, he has often said, comics, and I would imagine, other forms of storytelling, it should be thrills, chills, and spills.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was probably a phrase that was born, decades ago maybe in the 30s or the 40s, maybe even earlier than that, like in the radio days, who knows? But this guy has a career that goes back 50 years, and we are here to try and litigate and pare it down as Herculean a task as that may be, to his 5 best comics, So,
sir, I have to admit, I gotta admit, man, this is going to be way tougher than our previous top 5 episode. The Miller, that was a cakewalk compared to this.
Yeah.
Seriously, this is going to be tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And we, there's some things that we're going to miss, and there's some things that we're going to certainly spotlight and show love for along the way. But yeah, it was difficult for me too, because when I first started doing the Frank Miller, I was like, I had like maybe 6 or 7.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I'll argue with Adrian. We'll go back and forth and cross-examine each other. Yeah, exactly, and get it down to a tight 5. But when I started listening to stuff of his that I really dig, and really in some cases it's just one comic, it's just one thing that he did, there was probably more than 10, maybe 12.
Wow.
On the list. And I'm someone who bought the paperback covers that he painted.
Oh man, see, yeah.
I had a copy of the illustrations he did for Sherlock Holmes.
Oh yeah. Now, did you ever get the portfolio set?
Yeah, and I think it was it a Steady and Scarlet? Was that the?
That's it.
I think that's what it was. Yeah. Now I don't have it any longer.
Oh.
But I do remember getting it and was like, oh wow, this is kind of interesting and weird in a way. You know, like you were talking about Miller illustrating some YA novel, and it's like, okay, you know, but I remember getting it and really digging it. And for me, as a person who was drawn to Chaykin's work, I probably read an interview and then it made sense that he had actually apprenticed for Wally Wood. Not that Wally Wood's work is similar to his. Wally Wood's work is, you know, Wally Wood was a much better draftsman and a better drawer, if you will.
Yeah.
But the fact that Wally Wood was, you know, a storyteller, and Wally Wood was very much kind of a journeyman in the same way that Chaykin is. He's a journeyman. These are people who are dedicated, who go to work every day and who do the job. You know, they come in, they sit down, they clock in, they do the work. The work is work, but it's also craft. Mm-hmm. You know, so when you see Chaykin writing these essays about, you know, making comics and the business of comics and making comments on the history of comics and, you know, and the comic creators and so forth, he is someone who is a journeyman. But at the same time, you know, I think he views the work as worthy of esteem and high regard. You know, it is craft. So, you know, Wally Wood, that made sense. Gray Morrow, that made sense.
Gil Kane,
that made sense. Especially like he says, you know, Gil Kane, again, their art doesn't resemble each other at all. But he said he learned how to be a professional being an assistant to Gil Kane, how to do the work, how to deal with editors and you know, and get paid, and you know, and I guess, you know, all the things that behind the scenes that, you know, that a freelance comic book creator would have to know and have to gain as part of their professional skill set, not their creative skill set.
Yeah.
So, but let's get into it, man.
All right. Okay.
So, not unlike our conversation about Frank Miller's five best comics.
Yeah.
Okay. Without question, American Flag is in the top 5, right? That's in his 5 best.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
That's a given.
You know,
yeah. Come on. Don't be tripping. Come on, man.
Right. Yeah. Come on. That's absolutely in there. And just going back and looking at that stuff, that's really the demarcation point for me. There's actually, and it's funny, if you look at his career timeline from an image standpoint, the early stuff, he's kind of trying to be a little more like the Wally Woods and the Gray Morrows and his contemporaries. Mm-hmm. He's a little more illustrative. He's trying to kind of draw. It doesn't work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then a few years later, you see him start to kind of break it down a little bit. You see him start to pay a little more attention to just like graphic design and shape and, you know, really honing in on the balance of focus of the page as a piece, the panel as a piece, black and white, you know, all that Starrich stuff, Cody Starbuck, Gideon Faust, you know, even the stuff he did for Marvel, Kane and the Nick Fury story I referenced. Dominic Fortune a little less so. At least the very first version of Dominic Fortune. That stuff going into American Flag, it's almost like that's the first stuff was like 2D animation. And then we start to get into more sophisticated 2D animation. And then eventually we get into 3D animation. And I have some criticisms of like the coloring of his work in the 2000s, the late 90s and the 2000s.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where it just got really overbearing with the color. Where I was just like, you know, who's doing this?
Muddy.
Yeah, very muddy. You know, really saturated browns and purples and blues. And so you couldn't see what he was doing, you know, with his ink lines and with his, you know, with his solid line work. But American Flag. Man, when did you? Now you're an Image guy. You're a '90s guy.
Yeah.
When did you take to American Flag right away?
Well, see, now for me, it's a good thing you brought that up, because I did want to mention, like, when did I first take notice of Chaykin as a young collector? And as all things, it happened in Wizard. This was back in like '94. Yes, that was my byway, man. That was my Bible. Comics Journal for you, Wizard for me. Hey,
okay,
but,
all right.
But yeah, this was about '94, and there was a long article about Chaykin in there, maybe like 5 pages or whatnot, and was talking about him coming back to do Power and Glory for Malibu in that Bravura line. Mm-hmm. And he just talked about, oh, well, he's a creator that's been here for a long time. He went off to write The Flash and do some other television projects. And now he's coming back to comics. And he had done Midnight Men before this for the Epic line. And he was coming back to do, like, Power and Glory. So I remember reading that. And if I could be honest, man, I thought he came off like an asshole to me. Like, I remember reading this just thinking, like, why does he sound like a jerk? He just sounds like an asshole. Which is funny, because I think as a young person, mm-hmm. you're not privy to the pragmatism that this craft takes. You know what I'm saying? So he's a straight shooter. He's telling you, this is why I'm doing this. This is what I'm doing. And that directness, I think, is off-putting to a lot of fans who maybe are weaned more on superhero comics, which I was, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so it was just like, And his artwork as well during that period was kind of weird too. I love it now, but I remember looking at it then, it's like, it looks like he's trying to do some whack-ass Image, because it had all the, like, dagger marks and all the hash marks that you would find in, like, Scott Williams inking. It's like, what is he trying to do? No. But but I'll tell you, the first stuff that I got of his where I was like, okay, this kind of works. And it was around, I was like maybe 15 or 16. You could find straight issues of, like, that Shadow miniseries in the cheap bins. Like, you can close your eyes and almost pick one out. They're that ubiquitous.
Yeah. And
I got that maybe like issue, I think 2 or 3. And I was like, okay, this is straight. All right. And what attracted me to it once I saw that stuff was the sharpness of the graphics. Mm-hmm. That stuff kind of more approached like the stuff I was used to then, like the sharp graphics of, like, the Image type of style. So it was like, I halfway started to make a connection, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I was like, okay. But it really didn't hit me until I was an older teenager. Once I did get more familiar with Alex Toth and other, classic creators, where I was like, okay, now I get it. And I think I had to mature just a little bit too, to start understanding his stuff. Because his stuff is not written for kids, so to speak, and it's not to put, superhero material down, but his stuff is written above that. You know what I'm saying? Like, his stuff in its own way is very much mature, reader-oriented. And I don't mean not necessarily in the subject matter, but just in the approach to it, And even he said it himself when we interviewed him on a previous incarnation. He was saying, when it came to certain things like Times Squared, you probably weren't old enough to get it, mm-hmm. You, like, to understand the material. And I think that's true. And that's my experience with his work, totally. It wasn't until I was an older teenager going into, like, being a young man in my 20s that I was like, yeah, now it's starting to hit me. All right, bet. I'm down, you know what I'm saying? And circling back around to Flag, the stuff on Flag hit me around that same time in my late teens. Once I understood what he was doing, and I was familiar by then with, like, the whole package. Mm-hmm. Him, obviously Ken Bruzenak, like that Ken Bruzenak inking, the lettering, done deal. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? That that's half of the battle right there. You know what I'm saying? So just the whole package, and you got to mention, man, the other core ingredient too, aside from Chaykin's writing and the bruise-neck lettering, that duo tent, man, and the China markers and
yeah,
bruh, that all of that together, it's like, just the complete package. I love that stuff.
Yeah. Very much like, again, going back to the whole cartoonist vibe, the idea that this is, the images and that the writing, that all of this feels like one person's vision, and one person who is skilled enough and talented enough and ambitious enough to execute this vision well. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I just remember when Flag was coming out monthly, it just looked different from everything else. It felt different. It read different. As the kids say today, it just hit different. And it was just wonderful. And I don't think it was a crazy big seller. It was certainly successful, and it had a lot of critical acclaim. The heads knew, that this guy Howard Chaykin, who had kind of knocked around with Walt Simonson and James Sherman, and kind of came up in the ranks along the same time that Bernie Wrightson and Mike Kaluta did, that he was kind of coming into his own. But and it's funny because as it relates to us moving on, you mentioned when we were talking earlier that Chaykin is really like a definite part of the 80s as a result of this.
Oh, yeah.
Not unlike a John Byrne and Chris Claremont, not unlike a Bill Sienkiewicz and Doug Mensch, not unlike anyone else that you would consider to be a real, someone who became a star in the 80s or someone who became a fan favorite.
Mm-hmm.
He's right there. And you mentioned earlier as well, after American Flag, for the most part, going into the 90s, there's a period in there, obviously, where he left comics and he worked in television as a writer. But, everything is kind of like special projects.
Right.
You got Blade, he did Blade for like a year in like 2009 or 2010, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
But everything is special projects. Everything is, hey, can you do a reboot of this or relaunch of that, or him, pitching something? Hey, let me get this, let me get that, or whatever. And there were just a lot of real successes, I feel, creative successes, along the way. So let's definitely say, okay, American Flag is in there. We know that, right?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
So are there any single issue stories that you say, this is his best? Because that's what we're talking about, his 5 best. A single issue stories. Because we could talk about runs and all that kind of stuff. But, if we're going to talk about a guy who's done like 1 here, 1 there, or 4 here, or 6 there, and kind of got in and got out, he's the guy.
But see, here's the thing, though. For me, it's like his stuff reads better as a whole collection. When you read like something like The Shadow, I don't have the single issues anymore. I have just the collection, the original paperback, and for me, it's almost like I think of him more as a true graphic novelist in the purest sense. He draws, and his writing is such that it almost reads better for me as a collected edition, rather than monthly, So the other things that are on my list, except for one, which I think we'll agree on as well, they're all they would be like the actual stories, as opposed to the single issues. I get the feeling that you have single issues rather than whole stories. So
I have both, to be honest. I mean, on my list,
okay,
I'll go ahead and give you my list. On my list, I've got, for consideration, I've got Black Hawk, I've got The Shadow. I really enjoyed Batman and Robin Thrill Killer with Dan Brereton.
Oh, I forgot about that. That's right. Yeah.
I really dug that. Marvel Spotlight 31, and see, that's just a one and done. So and he didn't write it. Jim Starlin wrote it, but I do like Monarch Starstalker. That crazy character. I like the Dominic Fortune backup stories in Hulk magazine.
Yeah.
With the full color.
Yeah.
I'm a Cody Starbuck guy. I'm a Gideon Faust guy. I really fucking dug Mighty Love, yo.
See, that's the one where I'm like,
See?
That's a swing and a miss, man. I was like,
I really liked it, man. Every time I saw the title, I always thought about that Spinner song, Mighty Love. You know that song?
Yeah.
Mighty Love. Yeah, you're right. Sometimes make a rich man weak. Knock him off his feet. I always thought about the Spinner song. But, here's a guy who actually did, it's not a rom-com in a comic, but it's like a romantic love story or almost like a bit of a farce. It's like, You Got Mail or Shop Around the Corner or something like that, but in comic book form. And it worked. Like, he did it. They had a meet cute and, I didn't know. Oh, you had your mask on. I didn't know it was you. I mean, it worked for me. And again, it was kind of satirical in a way. I mean, it wasn't to be taken seriously.
Yeah, sure.
But it was very entertaining in almost the same way that a rom-com would be, like a really good rom-com would be. But I dig that. Anyway, Mighty Love, Black Kiss. Black Kiss?
That's on my list as well.
Black Kiss?
Yes.
Black Kiss. And then, The Star's My Destination, Swords of Heaven, Flowers of Hell.
And Empire.
No. And also Solo.
Oh, yes.
Where he basically just, he gets to pull out his big dick and set it on the table and say, this is how I do what I do. And just thump the table with his big dick. And I was like, wow, and again, Solo is an example where, he can take all of the things that are interesting to him from a writing standpoint, from a narrative standpoint, from a graphic design standpoint, from an illustrative standpoint, his love of old things, his love of, or his interest in, thrills, chills, and spills. There's a little bit of superhero in there, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't pull out my my Solo hardcover to double check this. Mm-hmm. There's jazz, there's fashion, there's all of these things that he really loves. And the thing about it is I mean, he's made, I hate to use the whole he's an old soul in a young body, because again, he's been doing retro oriented work since he was in his 20s and 30s. But I say that to say that when he does it, it doesn't feel like pastiche to me. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't feel cheap.
That's right.
It doesn't feel, you don't get a sense of artifice from it. He loves, older retro things. He loves fashion. He loves jazz. He loves the stage, and it feels authentic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. There's very little, if any, affectation when he does a lot of that older material, or material that takes place in like previous decades. Mm-hmm. It's like the difference between, say, him doing, that type of material and somebody like the late Dave Stevens doing The Rocketeer, also set in the 30s. While The Rocketeer was very well drawn and so forth, you get the feeling from Chaykin's work, it has more of a verisimilitude to it. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Whereas with Stevens and other people who do material like that, there's very much an affectation to it. You know what I mean? And Chaykin's work always feels grounded. And that's not just the older retro material. That's like all his material. It's almost it could be very salt of the earth. It could be very, very gritty as well. There's no black and white. Everything is gray. You know what I'm saying? Like, everyone has shades of gray to them. There's no Dudley Do-Right there. Yeah.
Right. What's on your list, man? Tell me everything that's on your list.
All right. Well, off top, I got American Flag. Number 2, and this is in no particular order. Number 2 is Black Kiss. Just the first one.
Right.
Part 2 and the special, they're okay. They're all right. But that first one, I think it's some of his best work, not for period reasons either. Number 3, The Shadow. Mm-hmm. Number 4, Black Hawk. Number 5, that Marvel Spotlight, number 31. You know what I mean?
Ooh, baby.
That's the champion. Got the belt. And then my honorable mentions would, of course, be like that solo issue. Let's see. I'm looking over at my stack over here. I read back over that Hey Kids comics, and I remember telling you in a text exchange a couple of days before, like, I didn't think it was too essential, but reading back on it and catching up on all the issues that I just got, recently as well of the newest series, it's very good. You know what I'm saying? And the thing is, it's it's him doing a bearded account, so to speak, of a period in comics that he's very familiar with, starting in the 50s on through the period where he got into comics in the 70s. You know what I'm saying? And if you know comic book history lore, like industry lore, you'll recognize a lot of the characters that are in there. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. If you're a true head like we are, you'll know, oh yeah, that's his version of Wally Wood. Oh yeah, that's his version of Julius Schwartz. That's definitely his version of Gil Kane and so forth. So it kind of has that fun aspect of it, but the writing on there is really good too. It's almost like his indictment of the industry, but at the same time doing a recollection of how the industry came to be what it was starting in the 50s, to ostensibly to the present. Yeah, man. So that's some of what's on my list.
When I first saw Hey Kids being advertised and talked about, it almost felt like his version of like Cavalier and Clay. Is that the impression you get at all?
That's a good point. And I can see how you would think that as well, because it is along those same lines in terms of, again, it's a bearded attempt to, capture, these particular eras in comics through these ensuing decades. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So you would not be totally wrong in that comparison for sure. Yeah, that's a good corollary. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm guessing for you, and I'm not bringing these up to make fun, but Divided States of Hysteria.
I have that. Like all his latter day like graphic novels, I got those, and those read. It's crazy because I love modern day Chaykin so much that even when the story takes these weird twists and turns that you're like, narratively, this is all over the place, but I still fucks with it anyway because it's Chaykin. Right. Like this Divided States of Hysteria, Midnight of the Soul,
Batman Dark Allegiances, yo.
Oh, Batman Dark Allegiances. Remember earlier you were talking about the coloring on that?
Yeah.
That's the only Chaykin I have ever thrown away because that coloring was atrocious.
Yeah.
It was being colored in the late 90s by this coloring house called Digital Chameleon.
I remember.
Who did a lot of DC books. Mm-hmm. Terrible. All their books almost are terrible. With the coloring? No.
Yeah.
But, the story was good if I could have made it through the coloring, man. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to say I may be confusing either Midnight Men or maybe it was Challengers way later on. But I remember there was some later era Chaykin stuff where Steve Olaf, what did Steve Olaf cover? Was that Black Hawk?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's Black Hawk, where you see Olaf, who I think he's, mostly considered to be, an accomplished colorist and someone who, at least understands color as it relates to storytelling. The balance of his colors against Chaykin's artwork was perfect, where it was certainly well past the 4-color, kind of almost cave drawing coloring that, we had in early comics, which I still kind of love. But, you go back and look at stuff and you're like, okay, why are the black people purple? What?
Gray.
Yeah, gray. What's going on there? Just where, it would just be like, okay, this is all we had. It's very much this is all we had. But Olaf's coloring on Black Hawk looked great. It wasn't too saturated. There was a sense of foreground and background. You could still appreciate Chaykin's line work, and then also appreciate the coloring in it. I think that was the last time for me in a big way where the coloring just worked. Modern coloring worked with his art. Almost all the stuff after that just seems like, and again, I mean, I guess we are talking about like Challengers. We're talking about Power and Glory, which was just a hot fucking mess. Hey, man, I'm sorry. Man. Hey, man.
Damn, come on, Power and Glory. That's that. Oh, man.
Yeah. So if we look at our lists, and I mean, there's other stuff in there that honorable mention, like those Enemy Ace stories again at the back of Men of War.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the reason I dug them was because I was becoming a fan of Chaykin, and I absolutely adored Joe Kubert's Enemy Ace. I absolutely worshipped it. And so I bought those, and I just kind of went with it. And again, you know, it almost looks like some of that older stuff. You know, he's inking like with Sharpies and micro pens. It doesn't look like brush or a crow quill or anything like that at all.
Yeah, for sure.
But I really like those. But since we both agreed on it, let's go to it. Black Kiss.
All right.
Okay.
Yes.
Now,
a long pause.
I can't even remember what the mood was when this came out.
Well,
you know what I mean? Like I can't. What year was it published? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was published by Vortex initially in like 87, 88.
Okay. So I was like 21, 22. No, 23, 24 maybe. Wow, I can't remember anything other than everybody was like, what? If before there was a WTF, what the fuck? People were like, what the fuck? You know, vampires and threesomes and nudity and
hermaphrodites
and you know, and booty holes and coochie holes and pee-pees and sperm and cum guzzling and fucking fuck it. I mean, all of it, yo. And this is before. This is years and this is decades before Pornhub. So the best porn we saw was, you know, Swedish erotica and, you know, garter belts and, you know, maybe the 80s video craze was starting to happen, but, you know, even that stuff was hard to get your hands on. And we were like, what? It was something else, but it worked. Like as a narrative piece,
yes,
it worked. You know, and it was kind of like a noir thriller. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, the story itself. But when you first saw that, and again, I don't know. I know you probably jumped around in terms of how you saw. I saw this stuff more or less in chronological order. Once you got to the 80s, I went back for the stuff in the 70s. But in the 80s, moving forward, I saw it as it was coming out. When did Black Kiss land in your lap? You know, no. You know, pun intended. When did you bust one to Black Kiss, yo?
Dang, just man, for me, Black Kiss was something like, you know, obviously, you know, I could not get my hands on it as a youngster, you know, even as a teenager. And plus, you know, a lot of people don't remember this, like the actual issues, if I recall correctly, they were very thin. They were like 16 pages or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So it wasn't even like a full thick comic book, you know? And for me, I finally came across Black Kiss. I think there was a reprint put out by Vortex, and I got a stray paperback of that when I was in my mid-20s. And the paperback was called Big Black Kiss.
Right.
And I was like, oh, dang. Hey, that's all I could say. As I'm reading it, I had heard about it. I knew kind of the subject matter. And all I would say was like, dang. Oh, damn. You know, man, dang. Chaykin went in.
Yeah, he did.
But, yeah, man. No pun intended again. But the thing about Black Kiss for me is, aside from, like I said, the period, you know, material, it's also like some of the densest graphics that he and Bruzenak have collaborated on. Like each page is just so dense. And it's a good thing that they kept it in black and white.
Right.
Had they tried to color it, it would have been terrible. It would have been information overload.
Yeah.
Just absolutely not needed. So black and white not only helped with the subject matter and the noir aspects of the story, but I think graphically too, it made it so much more attractive. You know what I'm saying? Almost as if you were reading a prose novel, even as opposed to like a graphic novel, just by how dense it was, and all these plots going back and forth and these characters and double crosses and what have you. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That's when it hit me. And then Dynamite came out with the reprint of the original Black Kiss, like in the early 2000s. And I grabbed that because it was in hardcover. And then they came out with a Black Kiss 2. And then a Black Kiss XXX Christmas special in July. A Christmas in July special. I was like, okay, all right. You got enough Black Kiss? Okay. And I was rereading those, and man, it's still just that first series for me. Like the sequel is, it gives some backstory to how those characters ended up, where they were, but it was kind of unneeded. It was like, So for me, it's just the original, man. The original still stands up. And the thing about it too is that Chaykin was saying that he had wrote Black Kiss at a time where he was out there in LA. He was living in LA. He was really starting to feel the oppression himself personally, as far as the city itself, like the personality of the city, which was totally different from New York. And he said you could just sense like the paranoia and just the vibe of the city was just not good.
Right.
He was feeling that. So that's one of the things that kind of prompted him to write, Black Kiss. And Black Kiss, you can see it's a California / Los Angeles type of tale. It's one of those things like Pulp Fiction or a Tarantino movie. It could only happen in Los Angeles. You know what I'm saying? It wouldn't work anywhere else. And that's what Black Kiss is. It's a Los Angeles story for sure.
Yeah. I kind of remember, man, when this came out, we were shopping pretty consistently at a couple of different comic shops, but one of them was, of course, Oxford Comics.
Yeah.
And, Oxford Comics had, they had a mainstream comic section, which was, 80% of the store. And then they had kind of the underground and the kind of X-rated comics over on the side here in the other 20% of the store. And so once I was old enough to kind of go over there, I could look, and I remember that's where it was sold.
Yes.
That's where it was. That's where it was kept. And I almost want to say like they should have marketed that like by putting the book in like a paper bag, like a nondescript brown paper bag, like sell it that way. As you're walking out of the store with your Black Kiss under your arm, ready to feast. But yeah, I agree with you, man. And also too, the fact that it was in black and white lent to kind of an underground quality, because there were a lot of underground 80s comics and independently produced 80s comics that were in black and white. So it definitely took it off the grid as far as mainstream comics were concerned. People who remembered Howard Chaykin from Star Wars, or people who remembered Howard Chaykin from American Flag or from anything else prior, like they're going to know that this is a different Howard Chaykin. And even though I don't think Black Kiss really had anything to do, certainly visually or in terms of how it was drawn, with his early work in like Star Reach, which was black and white.
Yeah.
But I think the black and white aspect of it, like you said, served it well. Those were very dense pages, and it made it an easier read, to a great extent. So yeah, I agree with you. So I think Black Kiss goes on there. And then also too, again, purient kind of subject matter aside, the fact that he tried something like that, executed it, again, to me is what makes it such a feat.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like there are, I enjoyed Matt Fraction's Sex Criminals. I think Chip Zdarsky did the artwork for it. I enjoyed the first trade of Sex Criminals, and it's not the same thing. I mean, it has, it's kind of lurid in a way, and it does have a certain an untoward vibe to it. But
yeah.
but he tried it and he succeeded at it. And that's always, to me, like, that's a credit to his talent and his vision and his ability to, to get the thread and to pull on it and pull on it and pull on it and pull on it until the sweater unravels completely. You know what I mean?
Yes, and the last thing I'll say about that is that it's the level of commitment to it. Often in comics, when somebody does something like, I'll say it, something like a sex criminals or something like that, there's like this, ooh, naughty aspect to it. Like, ooh, you doing some nudity. Ooh, you cussing and swearing and having sex and all that. Ooh wee. But it took somebody like Chaykin to be like, look, you need to stick the landing and commit to it. And that's what he did. Mm-hmm. And because he stuck the landing, I think that made that sort of an outlaw kind of comic almost. It's like, ooh, we, comic book readers, we want to see a little cheesecake, we want to see a little, whatever, but we don't want to see the full Monty. No. And he gave it to you. And he committed to it. And he didn't let you go until that series was done.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So we got American Flag. We got Black Kiss.
Yes.
Okay. So let's debate. I mean, and we're kind of dealing with the biggies here.
All right.
Can this list have Black Hawk and the Shadow? Is there room for both? If we were to consider both, are we leaving out something else that would be considered essential? Because I really like Black Hawk.
Yeah.
And I really dig the Shadow. Mm-hmm. I maybe dig Black Hawk more again because of the Joe Kubert fan in me, the Bob Kanigher fan in me, the Frank Robbins fan in me who kind of likes that stuff. And the fact that it's not superheroes, which he hasn't done a ton of superheroes. I mean, he's done quite a bit, but I mean, most of what he's known for is not traditional superheroes.
Right.
And this is, and this was like you mentioned earlier, this was like a reboot. This was like him doing a system refresh on Black Hawk. And again, it worked, especially, and I don't think, didn't he do a cover? He didn't do the interiors on it, but he did a cover, and it was just a tight portrait crop of behind the.
And he got a thumbs up.
And he's got a thumbs up, yeah.
That's the shit, yo. Or there's that one, and there's another Black Hawk cover, because it was the actual comic series. It's like the Black Hawk character's parachuting down. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm, yeah. Mm-hmm, he did like 3 or 4 covers. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And even the one that I really love, which was very, I think it was a complete homage to J.C. Landecker, where he's dancing in the tuxedo with the woman. That's the one right there. Exactly. Blackout. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I really love it. So I almost love Black Hawk in terms of a reboot or a refresh or relaunch or whatever the hell you want to call it, more than I do the Shadow, because I thought it was more in his wheelhouse. I almost, and I'm tipping over into another episode, but I kind of prefer Kyle Baker's Shadow to Chaykin's Shadow. It's just my preference.
No, but the thing is though, had reading back over the Shadow over the past couple of days, mm-hmm. He set up kind of like the legwork for that Baker and Andrew Helfer mini ongoing series, But to your credit though, I do prefer that Baker and Andy Helfer series.
Yeah.
Definitely more than the mini, But is there room for the Shadow and Black Hawk on here? I'm gonna say yes. Because
this is why I say no though.
Okay, all right.
Solo got to be in there, man. Doesn't it? Marvel Spotlight number 31. That's got to be in there, yo. It's got to be.
Yeah, but I mean. And again,
oh man, just discussing those. I mean, I'm not even bringing in Empire. I'm not even bringing in Stars My Destiny. I mean, all of that is not even making it. My Dominic Fortunes, which, dude, you would never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, gotten me to buy something called Hulk magazine unless Dominic Fortune was in the back. That's it. Hulk magazine? No, I'm not gonna do it.
Oh, man. Well, all right. Damn, yo, damn, you got me in a tight spot.
It's got to be one or the other, man, because there's too many. You had some other good stuff on there too, right? On your list.
Yeah. All right, bet. All right, fine. We'll make a compromise at Black Hawk. All right, because yes, the shadow that plays on later in a whole other episode that we'll be getting to shortly. But yeah, Black Hawk then. All right, bet.
Okay, Black
Grudgingly.
Hawk. Okay. Now, do we have to litigate? Do we have to, actually debate on Marvel Spotlight 31?
No, we don't.
Okay,
no,
right.
That's a given. Yeah, that's in there.
That's in there. Okay.
Yeah.
So we got 4
it's like
on
Red
there.
Goo. It's in there.
Right, yeah. right. So we got 4.
That's right. Now the 5th spot, though.
So let's do this. Do we need to leave room in a 5 best comics list for something that he wrote that another artist illustrated, like Thrill Killer, like Twilight,
yes,
like Bite Club, like American Century, like Batman Houdini?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Did he write Son of Superman as well?
I believe so, yeah.
With J.H. Williams? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Do any of those fall into an essential category for you where it's like his 5 best? I really dig Thrill Killer. I really dig Batman Houdini.
Twilight for me.
Twilight for you?
Mm-hmm. What? You wavering, man. Why? What was it? Was it the kick?
I can't speak ill of the God, yo. Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, man. I can't speak ill of the God, yo. It was just.
Was it the characters?
It was. For whatever reason, it just missed me. I have it, but it just missed me. I was just like, okay, all right. It didn't resonate. I mean, all these are not going to be gems. We know that.
Right, of course. Yeah. That's
I don't know, man.
See.
I think we split on that one, dog. It's gonna be a no for me, dog.
Oh man.
I'm sorry, yo. It's gonna be a no for me, dog.
Dang. Well, I tell you what, I will split the difference with you, and we can put. Well, I can't even. No, man. I was about to say I'll go Thrill Killer with you, but I wouldn't even feel it like that, yo.
No, yo. No, I love it. But Brereton's art is such an acquired taste. It's like non-alcoholic beer or, fucking vegan burgers or whatever. It's like you really have to be into it.
And what's crazy is like with Brereton, I remember being, you know how you'll go through phases with certain artists, like for about 6 months, you'll be into so-and-so.
Yeah.
Heavy.
Yeah.
And then once you're done, you'll give those issues away. That was like with me and Dan Brereton. So it was during that time that I read Thrill Killer. I was like, this is pretty good.
Yeah.
But then afterwards I was like, it's all right. All right.
Yeah. And I like the fact, like, he was painting back then, so I liked his paintings.
That's right.
They were very weird, but they were accomplished. He was a good painter, or he is a good painter.
Yes.
So I would say, man, look.
All right.
I do think Batman Houdini, The Devil's Workshop is great writing, but his 5 best, I say we don't sacrifice it. He's a writer-artist. I say we don't sacrifice it for something that he just wrote.
Okay.
I think then we're getting into our favorites as opposed to really trying to be, an impartial jury and determine, okay, what happened and who's guilty and who's not guilty. So
yeah.
Let's not include those. Okay, so we got American Flag.
That's right. Black Kiss.
We've got Black Hawk.
Yes.
So we have 2 more spots to fill.
Yes.
again, it's almost like someone saying, "Hey, let's just give him a solo album where he can just do whatever he wants." But I do think solo is really fantastic. It's as impressive to me in terms of, like, I think exactly what solo was supposed to be. I think almost all of those issues, most notably Howard Chaykin's issue and Darwin Cook's issue.
Yes.
You really see all the things that they do well, and with very few exception, and certainly not Chaykin, and certainly not Cook, where you see, oh, these motherfuckers are the truth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When something is the truth, it lives up to the hype. And you see it and you're like, God damn, that motherfucker did that shit. That jazz player with the fade haircut and the tweed jacket. Chaykin was the first person, and maybe the only person I know, who would let you know this is like a houndstooth jacket, or this is like a tweed jacket.
Mm-hmm. With that pattern.
You know, when you see the texture of the fabric, you're like, damn, nobody else really did that before. You know, there are other people who have drawn fabrics where I was like, damn, how do I know that's silk?
Yeah.
Damn, how do I know that's chiffon? Damn, how do I know that's houndstooth? But that whole tweed jacket vibe, he crushed it, man. And I just think everything he does well, he did extremely well in that book. And it just works for me, man.
You know what? I'm holding a copy of it now, and I'm taking another flip through it. Like, I read it this past week, and you know, based on the criteria that you said, man, nearly all of his interests are represented in there. You know, there's a Western in there. There's social commentary in there. There's social satire in there. There's some historical stuff in there. There's jazz in there. There's even an autobiographical piece about him in there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that issue of solo, that needs to go on the list for sure.
Okay.
I agree with you. Yes, sir.
Okay. So, are we at 4? Is that 4?
Yep, we're at 4.
Okay. So now, what would you? Because I don't want to. I want you to have the last word, and then if I'm not in full agreement, whatever, we'll litigate it. What would you throw out as a possible number 5 to round out the list? And again, it doesn't have to be a series. It doesn't have to be a mini series, limited series. It doesn't have to be a collector trade. It could be a single issue. It could be anything. What else do you think? What else would you submit to the court?
All right. I'm going to go off the beaten path here, if I may. And again, I know you say you can disagree with me, so please feel free to do so. I'm going to go with not a comic at all. I'm going to go with that Comics Journal, issue number 109, that interview.
That's it. That's it, baby.
That's all you need. Yes. I'm going to go with that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sir.
Yeah.
I had stuff like that written down. I had the illustrations that he did for Sherlock Holmes. I had the paperback covers written down just as honorable mentions. But the TCJ interview absolutely was it for me, man. Me and Fife, Michelle Fife, our friend, went back and forth online talking about that. It was probably years ago. That thing was like a Bible for me, you know, in the sense that, again, pre-podcasts, pre-internet, pre the availability of anything other than print interviews to kind of find out who was making this stuff, why they were making it, where they came from, where you thought they may be going. That was the only opportunity you had to discover that stuff. And I remember reading that interview, you know, and I was a kid who grew up, you know, in a divorced household. You know, my father was not around much until I turned about 15. Mm-hmm. So, to some extent, you know, I would unintentionally seek out kind of like surrogate dads and kind of paternal figures in my life. And I remember reading that interview, and I remember like understanding, one, that Chaykin was self-taught, you know, didn't have any real formal art training. He was really smart and well-read. He had a great vocabulary.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I even think I told you this, and this is a weird thing and an embarrassing thing to admit, but, you know, I remember when I met him in person, at a fantasy fair. He was there along with Bill Sienkiewicz and some other people, and I met him there. And he cut his sideburns really, really short. I think it was almost kind of a retro style kind of a thing. His sideburns were cut above his ear line.
Yeah.
And I remember I started cutting my sideburns in the same way.
Really?
Yes, and I don't remember why, but I just remember it was obviously a very specific look that he was going for. Is there a picture of him in there with that look?
Yes.
That's it. That's the guy I met That's the guy I met at the Atlanta Fantasy Fair. And
that's hilarious.
So, and now he is a white, guy from New York City. I am a 17 or 18-year-old black kid living in Southwest Atlanta with short sideburns. What did I think I was doing? But I was just so impressed with him as a person and as a personality. And I just remember that. But yeah, like the fact that he was self-taught, I was like, well, man, if he's self-taught, I can be self-taught.
Yeah.
And he was really well-read, although I don't think he went to college. So a lot of that was, that was him basically reading and educating himself in the same way that you would read like Sylvester Stallone. Never was not college educated, but he's a really smart guy. I mean, he reads a lot. He stays creatively curious and absorbs, everything.
That's right.
And so I was like, okay, well, I can improve my vocabulary. I mean, just things like that made an impression on me from reading that TCJ interview. And then I think maybe in that interview, he mentions things that made sense to me later on from an artistic perspective, that he would become interested in the work of a guy like Baron Story or David Grove, or, that sort of thing, So, I don't know. I do consider that to be, still to this day, it was a very influential document in terms of me truly connecting with him as a creator.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned that yourself and our buddy Michelle Fife, went back and forth about it. It was also Fife who recommended to me to get that copy of Comics Journal, because he and I, just like you and he are big Chaykin fans. The three of us are. You know what I'm saying? So anything Chaykin coming out, we'll just say, hey, man, did you get that? You heard about this coming out? That type of thing. And Michelle, he made sure you got to get that. You have to have that in your collection. And man, I did the page count on it. The interview itself is over 34 pages.
Yeah.
34 pages.
Yeah.
So it's nigh definitive. And the thing that I love about Chaykin too is that he is consistent throughout. And we've read a lot of his interviews. We've even talked to the man as well. Mm-hmm. Everything he talks about is consistent. Everything. And the cool thing is, as you read from one facet of his career and then read another interview at a different facet, you'll see how he's grown too. Like he's expanded upon, a certain artistic movement, a certain way of doing the craft. Mm-hmm. He's expanded upon that, but he's still consistent in his approach to it, But yeah, that Comics Journal interview is just like, it's fantastic. It should be required reading for any cartoonist, and just for any fan as well. Had I read that when I was younger, I probably would have still thought he was an asshole, because he comes across as very direct and sharp in there. But as a grown ass man, I find myself, when I read Chaykin interviews, I find myself nodding a lot, like, yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
and I don't always agree with everything that he says, but because he's an opinionated guy, and I think people think he's curmudgeonly or he's contrarian or whatever, and it's not that. I just think that he's very opinionated, and he's not afraid to speak his opinion. But I don't consider his opinion or his position on things to be like immutable and fixed. You know what I mean?
Right. It's not gospel. Yeah.
Yeah. He seems to be someone who, maybe now, that he's 70 years old, he may be a little more set in his ways, But prior to that, he seemed to be adapting with what was going on. When he came back to mainstream comics and did that Blade series in the mid 2000s with Guggenheim writing, and I was just like, why is he doing some shit with some guy named Mark Guggenheim? I didn't give a fuck about Mark Guggenheim. But, I mean, he was, at the time, he's like probably a 58, 59-year-old guy, and he wants to make a living, and this is an opportunity, and he knows how to do the job, and he did a good job. He did great work on it. So,
yeah.
But I do think that, I think you're right, man. And how did you get that issue? Because you must have just gotten that a few years ago, right?
That's right. When Fife mentioned it, I went to mycomicshop.com and I put it on my want list. They have a great want list function on there. And it'll let you know as they get in books and they catalog through them, hey, this is on your want list. Do you want it? And you better get it because somebody else might have it on their want list. So as soon as that popped up in my email, I said, hell yeah. And and I got it about a week later in the mail. But man, that's one of those jewels in my collection, not just my Chaykin collection, but in my overall collection in general. That's just like, man, maybe so far I've read it maybe twice a year. You know what I'm saying? I'll just sit down and just read through it, all over again, every 6 months or so, you know, and I'm just taken aback by all the things that you mentioned. His vocabulary, his thought process, why he does what he does. He's totally cognizant of his worth in the industry, his place inside the industry. He likes to think of himself as nowadays, it's almost like a cult figure, if you will, somebody you speak of in hushed tones. It's like, man, you remember Howard Chaykin? Oh yeah, that's the guy who did the Star Wars thing. And he's so much more than that. He really is.
Right.
I just think at large, people think he's the Star Wars guy, but that's only because they don't want to explore everything else that he's done besides that. And it's so much more, man.
I don't know anyone who's a true Chaykin fan who even mentions Star Wars.
You see, we haven't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It never comes up for me. I totally forget that he ever worked on it. I'm just like, but yeah, man, you are correct. You are correct. And I understand when he says he goes to conventions and people maybe don't line up, to get signatures and to get things signed and so forth in the way that they may do some others per se.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he is a comic book creator of some renown. I mentioned to you in our text exchange, I think he is the thinking man's comic book creator. If ever such a term could be used or coined, that's what he is. I think there's a fierce intelligence behind his work that I don't even get from people who only write. He's a writer and an artist, but for some people who only write comics, I don't necessarily get that same fierceness and that same that tooth to the work that I get from his work. And so I agree with you, man. And I don't know. I don't know. I'm not even sure how to finish my my thought. But yeah, but it's but I definitely think from what we have, if this was a time capsule, we say, okay, we need to create a time capsule. So if aliens, if the world blows up and aliens find this time capsule drifting on the solar winds and they open it up and we need them to know, okay, if you want to fuck with some Howard Chaykin, what do you need to get? If you need some Howard Chaykin, what do you need to get?
Yes.
Okay, so it's American Flag, it's Black Kiss, it's Marvel Spotlight number 31, it's Solo, and then it's the TCJ interview. What is that, 109 or 191?
109.
109. Okay. So they'll have what they need from that.
That concludes this episode of Sidebar Forever, hosted by Dwight Clark, Swain Hunt, and Adrian Johnson. You can find us online at sidebarforever.com. Any emails or questions can be directed to us at sidebarforever@gmail.com. And also, subscribe to us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram.